Your focus determines your reality in this week's Star Wars Resistance.
How you get so big getting food of this kind?
Hello, and welcome into this week's spoiler review for Star Wars Resistance, Kaz's Curse. This week, we spend some more quality time with our favorite buddy duo, Kaz and Neeku. Kaz finds himself at the end of a pirate's curse, and shenanigans ensue. We've spent a couple of episodes away from the Colossus on various adventures, so now it was time to check in and see what it's like on the Colossus itself. It seems like it's not actually all that different. I kind of wonder if the denizens of the Colossus are really aware of how dire their situation is. I mean, now they do have fuel. They presumably still have food. They may not be as aware that the First Order is looming on them, but then again, maybe they are. Bolza does go to Mika in order to determine his fate. So maybe it depends. I guess if you kind of look at the pirates, they're always just kind of happy to be there. It seemed like a pretty happy set of circumstances. I even kept forgetting that the sky overhead is holographic, that Neeku had set that up. Just because I'm so used to seeing the Colossus and seeing that sky, it didn't hit me until the end that it was like, oh yeah, that's a fake sky. So it's just nice to kind of check in with everybody. We even get to see Opie Pit with his floor scrubber. It was also kind of nice because you see the Celestian friend of Jace, who is now helping with the Aces. So he seems to have really come around and really sticking around with the good guys now, in spite of what his friends are up to. In this episode, Kaz must have caught the gambling bug from the last episode, because he's in playing a game of dice with the pirates. The pirates were hoping he was going to be an easy mark, but he's having an incredible string of luck. At this point, one of the pirates puts a curse on Kaz, which is almost more gross than it is scary, because he licks his hand and sticks it on Kaz, and it's pretty disgusting. And then pretty much the rest of the episode you're left to wonder, is the curse real? Is the curse not real? How is all of this going to play out? Now, in an episode like this, it's actually kind of interesting, because in Star Wars, you know, the Force is real, obviously, and we've seen kind of sorcery, witchcrafty stuff in Star Wars. I mean, you have the Dathomir witches, even though it all kind of comes from the Force in some way, that Force is that energy that connects everything. I think it's pretty safe to say that in Star Wars, curses can be real, but the question is this curse real or not? And it kind of leads to an interesting adventure in seeing if what's going on is coincidence, or as Neeku puts it, curse incidents. What was kind of funny about this is Neeku buys the curse like hook, line, and sinker. You know, Neeku is really the guy that kind of takes everything at face value and gets really excited about it. He's always the guy that's super, super pumped anytime something happens, only now he's super, super pumped, but in a scared sort of way, because he really believes all of the stuff that's happening to Kaz is really happening. In fact, when Kaz will go to Mika to talk about the curse, she says that the power this thing has is kind of to the extent that you believe in it. And so I wonder how much Kaz does really believe it in his core, or how much of that is Neeku's influence. Kaz does say that he used to have a lucky charm, so it's not like this is totally outside of what he'd believe. But we also know that he doesn't believe in the Force, so it wouldn't really be like him to be as into believing into this type of stuff either. I actually kind of wonder how Neeku would have enjoyed being in the Relics Raider episode, what he would have done inside of the Force Temple, how freaked out would he have been, because he does seem to believe in Mika and what Mika is up to. But with that, let's talk about what Mika is up to. She seems to have this tent set out on the deck. She's doing palm reading of sorts, giving people visions into their future, which are, of course, just vague enough where they can kind of come up with their own reason on what they could or couldn't mean. At this point, I want to talk about two separate things that are going on in this episode. The main through line in this episode is this curse and stuff that happens with Mika and that sort of thing. And then there's also the Asteroid field and the Guavian death gang. They are absolutely interconnected. I mean, Kaz's situation causes the latter situation to some degree, but there's things about that I want to talk about, and then there's curse stuff that I want to talk about. So let's talk about this curse through line, and then we'll get to the Guavians towards the end, so I'll be kind of talking about this episode a little bit out of chronological order. With the curse itself, there's some things that happen in a very specific sequence, and I kind of have a wonder about some stuff. This could just be me reading into things a little bit too much, but hey, it's an episode about whether or not curses are real, so I think it's an appropriate episode to read a little bit too much into stuff. From the point Kaz is cursed, everything that happens is really conceivable that it could have happened. Kaz is a klutz. We have seen it in practically every episode of the show. The Colossus has problems, right? The Colossus breaks down a lot. Yes, Niku is like, well, this hallway just had maintenance, but, you know, Niku also really believes what's going on here. So, you know, maybe under different circumstances he would have believed that it's just the Colossus. So we really don't see anything at any point in time in this episode that's too entirely out of the ordinary, even to the point of Kaz's fireball having mishaps in the asteroid field. All of that stuff is completely reasonable, something we've seen happen in the show. It just seems like a particularly strong run of bad luck. Now, this is also following a particularly strong run of good luck, where he was winning in a dice game over and over and over again. And if you play strategy games like I do, you know that luck tends to come in good waves and bad waves than it does in any kind of steady sense. I think you especially know that if you've ever played XCOM, to any of my XCOM friends out there. But it's a particular set of coincidences that I want to point out. First, we have Mika observing Kaz and Niku discussing the curse on the deck of the Colossus under the false sky. It's at this point that she talks to Bolza and warns him of his future that he interprets as being about Gorgs. Now, Kaz and Niku are in line for food. Food runs out, which again could just be a coincidence. It's at this point in time that a Gorg jumps on a cart carrying supplies and causes that cart to kind of go out of whack and almost run into Kaz. Also throughout the episode, Kaz is walking around and Kaz ends up at one point covered in Gorgs that are just chewing on him for no particular reason. There's even a really good gag where Bolza notices this and he's freaking out and saying no, 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 and it's easy to write this off as just a kind of through-line gag in Resistance, as I've really enjoyed seeing in the show before. But it's also interesting that once again that Kaz is having an issue because of Gorgs. Then, at the end of the episode, when Kaz kind of gets the one-up on the pirates, he takes his totem that Mika has given him and tosses it into the pirate soup. And they freak out, and then they toss it, and it ends up in Bolza's soup. He takes the totem out, and then inside of his soup is a Gorg. That Gorg freaks him out. The reason why I'm connecting all of these dots is then at the end of the episode, Kaz goes up to talk to Mika, and they have a nice little conversation. Kaz walks away, and then the episode ends with Mika talking to a Gorg on her shoulder, like, oh, these people are strange, superstitious types, aren't they? There's a part of me that wonders if that Gorg isn't, like, a pet of Mika's now. Does she give people fortunes and then send Gorgs out to cause them to happen? Are the Gorgs giving Kaz a bad day to eventually make it bad enough that he comes to talk to Mika? Did she specifically mention Gorgs to Bolza, even though it's an easy guess because he does work with Gorgs? Does she do that because they can kind of bother him? Maybe not. She doesn't necessarily seem malicious in the episode. I don't really have a reason to believe that, but at the same time, she is charging money for what she's doing. When Kaz tries to pay her, she just takes the whole boot of gold without negotiating with him. So I don't know. I could see her kind of working with some of the overlooked locals to stir up the pot to get more money. I don't know if there's actually any kind of textual evidence that was going on. That was just in the back of my mind. That it just seemed really suspect that all of these really bad things were happening, minus the stuff in the asteroid field, because of Gorgs, and then she just so happened to be friendly with a Gorg at the end of the episode. Now, that could just be because it's cute, and it's funny, and it's fun to see her with a little animal, but I don't know, I just thought that was amusing. As for the nature of the curse itself, like I was talking earlier, I fully believe that within Star Wars you can have curses, because I think that it would fall in line with stuff we've seen with the Dathomir witches and that sort of stuff. But I'm not sure that I actually do believe that the one that's on Kaz is real. It just seems like the tropey pirate's curse sort of thing. It seems like a prank. I mean, the two pirates are like laughing about it and making fun of Kaz. So to me, it just seems like they're just trying to mess with his head. There's nothing about this particular batch of pirates that has implied that they would be in any kind of way spiritual. You know, maybe if they had some sort of shaman-like character, but I think he was just messing with him, to be completely honest. And that calls into question Mika herself. One thing that I found interesting is, you know, she's talking to Bolza and is giving him a future, but then when Kaz comes in, she says right away, you know, this curse has as much power as you give it, which is an interesting thing, right? Because if Kaz doesn't believe in curses, then the curse can't have any power over him. You know, if that were true, I'm not really sure. You know, Kaz doesn't believe in the Force, but that doesn't stop the Force from being around. You know, if he were to meet Kylo Ren one day and Kylo goes to Force choke him, he can't go, no, actually, Kylo, I don't believe in the Force, that's not going to work, and then Kylo would fail to Force choke him. Within Star Wars, there is already a certain level of mysticism, and not believing in that mysticism does not stop its ability to affect you. However, when it comes to stuff like this, stuff that doesn't really have any kind of backing, something that somebody just said, yeah, I mean, if you get in your headspace and you become convinced that you have some sort of curse on you, that you are somehow unlucky, then that's going to affect you, because it's, you know, it's like the Qui-Gon quote, your focus determines your reality. If you are convinced that you have this thing impeding you, it's going to impede you. If you are not convinced, then it's not going to impede you. But that's when the power is coming from really something within side of you, you know, when the power source of whatever is on you is actually yourself, then you have control over it. But if it were something, you know, if Mother Talzin showed up and did something, I don't think Kaz would just be able to think his way out of it. I don't know if that distinction makes sense, and I don't know if that's really that important, and maybe I'm just overthinking it, maybe I'm reading too much into it, maybe I'm too much wanting everything to apply to lore, but it's just kind of interesting because you have Mika, who follows all these relics, goes into all these temples, sees all of this stuff, understands the importance of all of these things, to the point where she wants, you know, the Sith relic that she found in the first episode where we meet her destroyed, rather than the First Order getting it. You know, you would think that she would have in some way encountered the Force. She's talking with children from Tahar and talking of the Force, but then to kind of have something like this and just be like, it has the power that you assigned to it. She just seems like a very interesting character, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with her, hopefully, in the future, and learning just how much she believes in different things and what things she believes in, because right now she's kind of playing the all things to all people type of person. She has this mystical knowledge when she has it, and she dismisses something when she dismisses it. I don't think it's inconsistent. I do believe there's going to be, you know, a specific reasoning or a specific line of logic for her. I just don't think we've seen it yet, but I'm very intrigued by her character in this episode. Especially because we see her wanting money. I mean, she does just take the boot, but she also doesn't try to scam Kaz further. You know, she doesn't do some sort of really crazy thing and lick her hand and wet willy Kaz's face. You know, and is that something she would have done to somebody else and she respects Kaz, or is that just not something she would do in general? Again, I just really want to know more about her character. So now let's talk about the asteroid field and the Guavian death gang. I guess real quick, I didn't really talk about Kaz's bad luck in the asteroid field. Again, if you watch that, he's trying to hype himself up, talk himself out of being in the curse the first time he goes out, and he's like, this isn't going to affect me, and he just hits a button. It's distinctly possible that he just was overly confident, hit the wrong button, dropped his landing gear, and because of that, he got into an accident, and his ship got hit, and because his ship got hit, you know, he was in distress, and then rather than radioing, hey, I have no gravity, I need backup, he just kind of decided to freak out, and that's how the whole scouting incident came about. So, again, I guess it's all in how you want to read it, but I do think there's a perfectly logical explanation for everything that happened for him in the asteroid field, especially because we know he is klutzy, but, you know, who knows. That said, the Guavian Death Gang, in of themselves, was so cool to see. These guys we first met on screen in The Force Awakens. It was really fun to see them come back. Of course, we saw them last season as well, when we had the episode with Speedstar, Yeager's brother, so it was a nice connection both to what's going on in the films and adding to and taking part in the kind of underworld lore of this time period while also connecting back to something in the first season. And I really like this idea of having these third-party villains. I think they were a really good choice. So I've had this discussion on Twitter, I've had this discussion in a couple different Discord servers I'm in, that, you know, there's a lot of people who want to see more of the First Order in this show, and I completely understand, and I love the episodes that have had the First Order in them, and I completely agree that those episodes are some of the more stronger episodes, at least in this season, if not in both seasons. Like, I'm not arguing the point that when we see the First Order, it's a really special, wonderful episode, but, you know, I remember back when the Clone Wars was airing on TV. Like, I was watching that show weekly as it aired on Cartoon Network back before the Disney buyout, and a very regular complaint about that show was how weak the Separatists are, and how often you saw General Grievous lose. And I just remember week after week reading people on message boards, because it was still a little bit, I mean, social media was starting to come around, but people were still discussing shows in different places. Just every week reading, You know, it's really dumb that the Separatists never actually win, and it just seems like the Republic wins every episode, and how did this war go on for 3 years, blah blah blah. Because when you're watching a TV show and you're trying to end it on a good note, you have to have the good guys win. My worry about this show is if they had the First Order in it all of the time, the First Order would have to, if not lose, at least lose sight of where our heroes are, and it would make them look weak and incompetent. And I don't really want that. I want the First Order to be this looming, scary threat. When I see Pyre and Tyranny, I want to be afraid for what's going to happen to my favorite characters on screen. I want to be afraid of what Tam is going through just from a storytelling sense. And if we spend more time with the First Order, we either, you know, have a very truncated arc with Tam with the First Order where she would have just been back in a couple of episodes, or you have to drag it out, and then you have to spend time watching the First Order not successfully catch the Colossus. Like, every episode is just the Colossus getting away at the last second, like they did in this episode. Only in this episode, it's them getting away from the Guavian Death Gang instead of them getting away from the First Order, so it's not a loss on the First Order's part. It does set up now, because the Guavians did threaten to turn them over to the First Order, the Guavians can easily call the First Order and give them a last known location of the Colossus and get them back on the Colossus's trail. So it's a good way to add this tension and add this fear, this ever-looming presence of the First Order, without having to give the First Order a loss. Similarly with Tam, I think that if we spend too much time with Tam, you know, you go back to Rendezvous Point, where she met Tora's mom, she's conflicted. I think at this point she knows she is not really loved in the First Order, that Tyranny is not going to show her any kind of mercy if she screws up. She's not valued there. But she's kind of convincing herself of her own, of these lies that she's been fed. I think the more time we spend with Tam in that kind of vacillating state, the less Tam is justified. You watch the first season of Resistance, you absolutely understand why Tam did everything she did. I don't blame Tam for a second for what happened to her. But if we spend too much time seeing her have opportunities to leave the First Order, then every time you have to continue to justify why she hasn't left. I'm sorry, none of this, I guess, really has to do with this episode, but this has just been my own kind of personal soapbox of, as much as I want to spend more time with Tam, and I really think we will, I just think Tam's story is going to be a longer story spread out over the whole season. But that's really what I have to say about this week's episode. Overall, you know, I thought it was fine. I thought it was fun. I like seeing Niku be silly. If anything, it just kind of spun more mystery and more conspiracy theories for Mika for me than it did anything else. This was 100% just spending time with Kaz and Niku, and I'm glad to have time to spend with Kaz and Niku, because pretty soon the show's going to be done and we don't know when we're going to see Kaz and Niku hanging out again, so I was happy to see them together. I am definitely missing seeing the First Order. I'm definitely missing the tension that comes from the danger of the First Order, but I also appreciate that they're giving us time to just enjoy the show for what it is, that they're not weakening the First Order, and that when we eventually get this payoff of them finding Tam again, when we get this payoff of, you know, does the Colossus ever shake the First Order off their trail, and where do they go, and do they meet up with the greater resistance as a whole? I just feel like those payoffs are going to really feel worth it, because we've spent all this time, versus if they had just happened really, really quickly. And you know, I say that, and I've been saying in other reviews how much Resistance doesn't delay payoffs, and I really still don't think it is, even though I just said what I'd already said. If you look at Clone Wars and you look at Rebels, that setup would be something from the first season, and you wouldn't get that payoff to the third or fourth season sometimes. And I think we forget, because so much time has passed, how much there was kind of the long game in both of those shows. So if the payoff is literally something that was set up in the season 1 finale or the season 2 opener, and we get it by the end of the second season, that really isn't a long wait. It really isn't. I've been enjoying it. I appreciate getting to spend time with two of my favorite characters. Maybe this episode didn't change the course of galactic history, but it definitely has me wondering more about Mika, and I want to see more of our fun Colossus friends. But let me know what you thought of the episode. If you're not already, follow us on all the socials. And until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.